Maigret and the Spinster by Georges Simenon. Part 1, Chapter 1.
From the moment he lit it in the doorway of the apartment house on Boulevard Ricard-Lenoir, Maigret savored his pipe with greater enjoyment than on other mornings. The first fog of the year was an unexpected treat, like the first snow to a child, especially as this was no noxious yellowish winter fog, but rather a milky haze interspersed with halos of light. The air was crisp. He felt a tingling in his fingers and the tip of his nose, and his footsteps rang out on pavement. A faint smell of mothballs still clung about the heavy velvet-collared overcoat which was such a familiar sight at the Quai des Orfèvres. With his hands in his pockets and his bowler hat pulled down low over his forehead, Maigret sauntered unhurriedly toward police headquarters. Indulgently, he smiled as the slip of a girl appeared suddenly out of the fog at a run and collided with his dark, bulky figure. "Oh, sorry, mister." She was off again in a flash, anxious not to miss her bus or subway. The whole of Paris, that morning, seemed to be enjoying the fog every bit as much as the chief superintendent. Only the tugs on the Seine, invisible to the passers-by, intermittently sounded a hoarse, uneasy note. One impression above all remained with him, though he could not have explained why. Having crossed Place de la Bastille, he was passing a little bistro on his way down Boulevard Henri IV. The door, like the door of most cafes on this cold morning, was shut for the first time for months. As he went past, someone opened it, and Maigret's nostrils were assailed by a gust of fragrance which was forever to remain with him as the very quintessence of Paris at daybreak, the fragrance of frothy coffee and hot croissant, spiced with a hint of rum. Behind the steamed-up windows, he could just make out in shadowy outline some 10, 15, or perhaps 20 people crammed up against the sink counter, breakfasting before rushing off to work. It was just 9 as he went through the arched gateway of police headquarters and, along with several of his colleagues, climbed the great staircase, which, as always, was thick with dust. No sooner was his head on the level with the first-floor landing than he glanced mechanically toward the glass-walled waiting room. Catching sight of Cécile sitting on one of the green velvet chairs, he frowned. Or rather, to be perfectly honest, he deliberately assumed a grumpy expression. "What do you know, Maigret? She's back." It was Cassieux, head of the Vice Squad, who had arrived close on his heels. Inevitably, he would be subjected to a lot more banter of his sort, as he was every time Cecile came to see him. He attempted to slink past without being seen. How long had she been there? She was quite capable of sitting in one spot like an effigy for hours at a time, her hands folded on her bag, her absurd green hat a little askew on top of her tightly screwed back hair. Needless to say, the chief superintendent did not escape unseen. She sprang to her feet, her mouth opened. He could not hear her voice through the glass screen, but no doubt she had murmured with a sigh. At last, hunching his shoulders, Maigret made a dash for his office at the end of the corridor. He was intercepted by the guard, eager to announce her. I know. She'll just have to wait," mumbled Maigret. Owing to the fog, he had to switch on the green-shaded light on his desk. He took off his coat and hat and glanced at the stove, reflecting that, if it was as cold as this tomorrow, he would give orders to have it lit. Then, rubbing his cold hands together, he sat down heavily, breathed a sigh of contentment, and picked up the telephone. "Hello, is that le vieux Normand? Can I speak to Monsieur Janvier, please? Hello, is that you, Janvier?" In accordance with instructions, Inspector Janvier had been at his post in this little café on Rue Saint-Antoine since 7 o'clock that morning. From there, seated at one of the tables, he could keep watch on the Hôtel des Arcades. "Any developments?" "They're all tucked up safe and sound, Chief. The woman went out half an hour ago to buy bread and butter, and a quarter-pound of ground coffee. She's just got back." "Is Lucas at his post?" "I caught a glimpse of him at the window when I arrived." "Good. I'm sending Jordan to relieve you. Chilled to the bone, are you? It's a bit raw, but I'm okay. The thought of Sergeant Lucas shut up in one room for the past 4 days in the guise of an elderly invalid made Maigret chuckle. He was saddled with the job of keeping tabs on a gang of Poles, 5 or 6 of them, who were all holed up together in a squalid hotel Descartes. There was nothing much to go on, except that one of them, nicknamed the Baron, had changed the bill, stolen from the Vansittart farm, at a pari-mutuel window at Longchamp. This particular crowd were in the habit of wandering about Paris, aimlessly as far as anyone knew, but their lives seemed to revolve around a young woman who lived on Rue de Bihar, though whether she was the mistress of one of them or was useful to them in some other capacity, no one could tell. Lucas, disguised as a sick man muffled up in shawls, watched them from morning till night from a room in the building opposite. Maigret got up and went across to empty his pipe into the coal bucket. He had a whole collection of pipes on his desk, and as he went to pick up another, he caught sight of the slip that Cecile had filled in. Just as he was about to read it, a bell shrilled insistently in the corridor. The daily briefing. He scooped up the vials that had been laid out for him and, in company with all the other departmental heads, made his way to the chief commissioner's office. They went through the usual little ceremony. The commissioner, who had long white hair and a Van Dyke beard, shook hands with each of them in turn. "Have you seen her?" Maigret played the innocent. "Who?" "Cécile. If I were in Madame Maigret's shoes." Poor Cécile. And yet she was still a young woman. Maigret had seen her personal papers. She was barely 28. But if ever anyone had spinster written all over her, it was she. In spite of her eagerness to be friendly, she was totally lacking in charm. Those black dresses of hers, which she made herself from cheap paper patterns, that absurd green hat. Beneath such wrappings, it was impossible to imagine any feminine charms. And her extreme pallor and, to cap it all, the slight cast in one eye. "She squints," asserted Chief Superintendent Cassieux. This was an exaggeration. One could not go as far as to say that she was cross-eyed. All the same, it had to be admitted that her left and right pupils were not in perfect alignment. She was in the habit of turning up, resigned in advance to being kept waiting, at 8 in the morning. "May I see Chief Superintendent Maigret, please?" "I don't know if he'll be coming in this morning. I could take you to Inspector Berger, who—" "No, thank you, I'll wait." And she would wait, all day if need be, motionless, patient, and uncomplaining, until the chief superintendent reached the top of the stairs, when she would spring to her feet, seemingly in the grip of some powerful emotion. "Take it from me, my dear fellow, she's in love." The chief superintendent stood about idly chatting for a while, until the talk veered imperceptibly toward the work in hand. "Any new developments in the Pelican case, Cassieux?" "I've summoned the proprietor for questioning at 10 o'clock. He's bound to talk." "Go easy on him, won't you? He's got an influential friend in Parliament, and I don't want any trouble. What news of your polls, Maigret?" "I'm still waiting. I intend to keep watch myself tonight. If by tomorrow there are still no developments, I'll try the effect of a personal confrontation with the woman. A dirty bunch. 3 murders in 6 months. All at isolated farms in the north. Coarse, brutal things, dealing death with a hatchet." A golden glow was spreading through the fog. It was no longer necessary to have the lights on. The chief commissioner pulled a file toward him across his desk. "If you have a moment to spare this morning, Maigret, it's a family welfare matter. A 19-year-old youth, the son of a prosperous industrialist, who— I'll see to it." The briefing went on for another half-hour, amid the fumes of pipes and cigarettes, with periodic interruptions from the telephone. "Very well, Monsieur le Minister." "Yes, indeed, Monsieur le Minister." Outside in the vast corridors, the inspectors could be heard scurrying back and forth between the various offices, and there was much banging of doors and ringing of telephones. Maigret, with his papers under his arm, returned to his own office, his mind occupied with the gang of Poles. Absently, he put his papers down on top of the slip filled in by Cecile. He had only just sat down when the guard knocked at the door. About that young woman. Well, will you see her now? Later. First, he wanted to settle the matter in which the chief commissioner had enlisted his aid. He knew where to find a young man, on whom he had had his eye for some time. Hello, get me the Hotel Miossotti, on Rue Blanche. It was a seedy hotel, where youths like the young man in question hung out to sniff cocaine and indulge their kinky vices. Hello, listen, Francis. I think I'm going to have to close down that place of yours, for good. What? I couldn't care less. Aren't you laying it on a bit thick? You can do yourself a good turn if you take my advice and send young Duchemin over to me right away. Better still, bring him along yourself. I have a few words to say to that young man. Oh yes, he is at your place, all right. And even if he isn't, I'm quite sure you know how to get hold of him before lunch. I'm counting on you. There was a call waiting for him on another line, an embarrassed examining magistrate. Chief Superintendent Maigret. It's about Pénicaud. Chief Superintendent. He claims that you obtained his confession by intimidation. He says you made him strip to the skin in your office and left him there stark naked for 5 hours. In the duty office next door, a crowd of inspectors, with their hats set jauntily on their heads and cigarettes dangling from their lips, were waiting their orders. It was 11 o'clock before he remembered Cécile and pressed the buzzer. I'm seeing the young woman now. The guard was back within seconds. There was no one with him. She's gone, Chief Superintendent. Ah. His first reaction was to shrug it off. Then, as he sat down again, he frowned. This was not like Cécile, who had once waited 7 hours for him, sitting motionless in a waiting room. There were papers all over his desk. He searched through them for the slips she had filled in. At last, under young Duchemin's file, he found it. I must see you most urgently. Something terrible happened last night. Cécile Pardon. In response to the buzzer, the guard returned. Tell me, Leopold, what time does she leave? I don't know, Chief Superintendent. Everybody seems to be buzzing for me this morning. She was still there half an hour ago. Was there anyone else in the waiting room? 2 people for the Chief Commissioner. An elderly man asking to see someone in the Department of Public Prosecution. Then, well, you know how it is in the mornings. People coming and going the whole time. I hadn't noticed, until just now, that the young lady was no longer there. Maigret felt a nasty little twinge of uneasiness in his chest. He was not happy about it. Poor Cécile. She wasn't all that much of a figure of fun. If she comes back, let me... No, he had changed his mind. He called in one of his inspectors. The proprietor of the Hotel Miossotti will be here shortly with a young man of the name of Duchemin. Tell them they are to wait for me. If I'm not back by lunchtime, the hotel proprietor can go back to his work, but hold on to the young man. When he got to the Point Saint-Michel, he was on the point of hailing a taxi as a gesture, and precisely because he thought of it as a gesture, he changed his mind and decided to take the streetcar. The wretched Cécile and her concerns weren't all that important. Why should he concede? The fog, far from dispersing, was thickening, though it was growing less cold. Maigret stood on the open platform, smoking his pipe. The rattling and braking of the streetcar almost shook his head off his shoulders. How long ago was that Cécile first put in an appearance at police headquarters? About 6 months. His diary was in his office, but he could check when he got back. She had lost no time in asking to see Chief Superintendent Maigret, but probably only because she had seen his name in the papers. She had seemed perfectly calm. Had she been aware that her story sounded like the product of an over-fertile imagination? By speaking, with a visible effort in level tones, looking the Chief Superintendent straight in the eye and smiling, she had done her best to counteract the elements of fantasy in her narrative. I'm not an impressionable woman, Chief Superintendent, and I swear I'm telling you the literal truth. I know the exact position of every piece of furniture and ornament, as you would expect, since I do all the housework. My aunt has always been opposed to employing a maid. The first time it happened, I thought I must be mistaken, but after that, I paid particular attention, and yesterday, I marked the positions of various objects. I even went further. I fixed the length of thread across the front door. Well now, not only did I find that 2 chairs had been moved, but also that the thread had been broken. So obviously, someone must have been in the apartment. Whoever it was spent some time in the sitting room and, what's more, opened my aunt's desk. I'd rigged up something there too. It's the 3rd time in 2 months. My aunt has been almost wholly incapacitated for some months. No one has a key to the apartment, and yet the lock hasn't been forced. I haven't liked to mention it to Aunt Juliette. It would only worry her. All the same, I'm certain of one thing. Nothing has been taken. If it had been, she would have mentioned it. She's so suspicious of everyone. In short, Maigret had said, summing up, what you're saying is that some person unknown has broken into the apartment where you live with your aunt 3 times during the night in the past 2 months, and that, on each occasion, he went into the sitting room and moved the chairs around. And the blotter, she reminded him. He moved the chairs and the blotter and searched the desk, in spite of its being locked, and the locks remaining intact. I should add that last night someone had been smoking in there, she persisted. Neither my aunt nor I smoke. No man came to the apartment yesterday, and yet this morning the sitting room smelled of tobacco. I'll come and have a look around. That's just what I wanted to avoid. My aunt isn't an easy person. She'll be angry with me, especially as I've said nothing about it to her. In that case, what do you want us to do? I don't know. I feel I can trust you. Perhaps if you could keep watch for a couple of nights in the hallway. Poor misguided creature. Did she really think that a chief superintendent of the police judiciaire had nothing better to do than to lurk about for nights on end in a stairwell, checking up on some garbled story brought to him by a foolish girl? I'll send Lucas along tomorrow night. Can't you come yourself? No, absolutely not. She was going too far, and her vexation, his colleagues were right there, was very like that of someone jilted in love. He may not come again tomorrow, maybe 3 days from now, or 5 or 10. How should I know? I'm scared. Chief Superintendent, the thought of a man. Where do you live? At Bourg-la-Reine, about the mile beyond the Port d'Orléans, on the Rue Nationale, just opposite the 5th stop. It's a big 5-story brick building with shops on the ground floor, a bicycle shop and a grocer's. We live on the 5th floor. Lucas had gone there and questioned the neighbors. On his return, he had sounded skeptical. An old woman, housebound for the past few months, and a niece pressed into service as part domestic, part nurse. The local police had been involved and had kept watch for nearly a month. No unauthorized person had been seen to enter the building at night. All the same, Cécile had returned to the Quai des Sauveurs. He's been in the apartment again, Chief Superintendent. This time I found traces of ink on the blotter, and I put in fresh paper only yesterday evening. Did you find anything missing? Nothing. Maigret had been misguided enough to tell the story to his colleagues, and soon the whole apartment was pulling his leg. Maigret has made a conquest. The young woman with the squint, visible behind the glass wall of the waiting room, became an object of quizzical scrutiny. Colleagues were forever knocking on his door. Watch out, there's someone waiting for you. Who? Your lady friend. For 8 nights in succession, Lucas had lurked on the staircase and had not seen or heard anything. Maybe he'll come tomorrow night, Cécile had suggested. But there was no justification for incurring further expense. Cécile is here. Cécile was a celebrity. Everyone called her Cécile. Inspectors about to knock on Maigret's door would be stopped with the warning, careful, he's got someone with him. Who? Cécile! Maigret changed streetcars at the Port d'Orléans. At the 5th stop, he got off. On his right, a building stood all by itself, flanked on either side by wasteland. The effect was of a thin slice of layer cake sticking out into the road. There seemed to be nothing amiss. Cars sped toward Arpajon and Orléans, and there were trucks returning from the central market. The door to the building was sandwiched between a bicycle shop and a grocer's. The concierge was scraping carrots. Is Mademoiselle Pardon back yet? Mademoiselle Cécile? I don't think so. But if you care to ring the bell, Madame Bonnet will let you in. I understood that she's bedridden. She is, more or less, but she's had a remote control system installed within reach of a chair, the same as I have in the lodge. And besides, if she really wants to. 5 floors up, Maigret hated stairs. These were dark and carpeted in tobacco brown. The walls were dingy. Each floor had a different smell according to what was cooking in the various kitchens. The sounds also varied. The tingling of the piano, the squealing of children, the reverberation of voices raised in anger. On the fifth floor, on the left, a dusty visiting card had been affixed above the bell. Jean Sivichy. So it must be the apartment on the right. He rang the bell. He could hear it ringing throughout the apartment, but there was no click of a latch being released, and no one came to the door. He rang again. Embarrassment was superseded by anxiety, anxiety by remorse. Behind him, a woman's voice asked, "What do you want?" He turned around to see a shapely young woman wearing an extremely becoming pale blue dressing gown. Madame Boynet. "That's her apartment, all right," she replied, speaking with a slight foreign accent. "Is there no answer? That's odd." She tried the bell herself, revealing more bare flesh as she raised her arm. "Even if Cécile is out, her aunt." Maigret hung about on the landing for another 10 minutes, then set off to look for a locksmith. The nearest one was almost a mile away. This time the sound of his approach brought out not merely the girl, but her mother and sister as well. "Has there been an accident, do you think?" The lock, which had not been tampered with, gave easily. Maigret led the way into the apartment, which was overcrowded with old furniture and ornaments. He spared them only a cursory glance. A sitting room at number 8230, a dining room, an open door, and lying on a mahogany bed, an old woman with dyed hair who... "Would you please leave, do you hear?" he shouted, turning on the three women. "If this is how you get your kicks, I'm sorry for you." An odd sort of corpse, a fat little old woman with a painted face and stringy hair, heavily peroxide, showing white at the roots, in a red dressing gown and with one stocking, just one, on the leg that dangled over the side of the bed. There was no possible doubt about it. She had been strangled. Looking fierce and troubled, he returned to the landing. "Someone go and get the police officer." 5 minutes later, he was in a telephone booth in a bistro nearby. "Hello, this is Chief Superintendent Maigret. Who is that speaking?" "Good. Listen, my boys. Is Cecile around? I want you to slip across to the public prosecutor's office. See if you can have a word with the director in person. Tell him, got it? I'm staying here, and you'd better let the forensic people know as well, if by any chance Cecile turns up. What's the matter with you? Listen, this is no laughing matter." When he came out of the bistro, after having downed a glass of rum at the bar, a crowd of about 50 people had gathered outside the oddly shaped building. In spite of himself, he searched the crowd for Cecile. It was not until 5 o'clock that afternoon that he was to learn that Cecile was dead.
Noxious. Noxious. Adjective. Harmful, poisonous, or very unpleasant. Quintessence. Quintessence. Now, the most perfect or typical example of a quality or class. Parimutuel. Parimutuel. Now, a form of betting in which those backing the first three places divide the loser's stakes. Maigret and a Spinster by George Simenon. Part 1, Chapter 2.
Once again, with the dining table set for two, Madame Maigret was to be kept waiting. Not that she wasn't used to it. The telephone, finally installed, had made no difference. Maigret invariably forgot to let her know. As to young Duchemin, it would be left to Cassieux to deliver the customary lecture. Slowly, with knitted brows, the chief superintendent had once again climbed the 5 flights of stairs, oblivious of the life going on behind closed doors on every floor. He was thinking only of Cécile, unattractive Cécile, who had been the butt of so many jokes, and who was banteringly referred to by some of his colleagues as Maigret's call girl. This house in the suburbs had been her home. This dark staircase had been used by her every day. The smells of this place had still clung about her clothes as she sat, fearful yet uncomplaining, in the waiting room at the Quai des Orfèvres. whenever Maigret had condescended to grant her an interview, had there not always been more than a hint of ill-concealed irony under his mask of gravity as he asked, "Well, have the ornaments been on the move again? Did you find the inkwell at the wrong end of the table this morning? Has the paper knife escaped from its drawer?" When he reached the 5th floor, he gave orders to the police officer to admit no one to the apartment, and pushed open the door. Then he turned back to take a good look at the doorbell. It was not an electric bell button, but a thick red and yellow rope. He pulled it. An old-fashioned metal bell tinkled in the sitting room. "Will you see to it, officer, that no one touches this door?" He did not think that any useful fingerprints might be found there, but one could never be sure. He was in a sour mood. He was still haunted by the memory of Cecile sitting in the aquarium, as the waiting room at police headquarters was familiarly called because one of its walls was entirely of glass. It did not need a doctor to tell him that the old woman had been dead for some hours, well before the time of her niece's arrival at the Quai des Aubert. Had Cecile been a witness to the murder? If so, she had not cried out or gone for help. She had spent the rest of the night in the apartment with the corpse and, in the morning, had washed and dressed as usual. The glimpse he had had of her on arrival at headquarters had been enough to show him that she was dressed as he had always seen her. To make doubly sure, he decided to check, as he considered it a matter of some importance. He began looking for her room. At first, he could not find it. The front of the apartment consisted of 3 rooms: the sitting room, the dining room, and the aunt's bedroom. To the right of the corridor, there were a kitchen and pantry, with a door at the back. Beyond this door, Maigret found a little cubbyhole, dimly lit by a skylight and furnished with an iron bedstead, a wash basin, and a wardrobe, which had been Cecile's bedroom. The bed was unmade. There was soapy water in the wash basin and a comb on the side, with a few dark hairs between the teeth. A salmon-pink flannel dressing gown was flung over a chair. Had Cecile known already, by the time she started getting dressed? It must have been almost as dark as night when she went out into the street, or rather into the road, for the building fronted onto the highway. She must have waited in darkness at the streetcar stop, barely 100 yards away. The fog had been thick. On arrival at police headquarters, she had filled in a slip and sat down in the waiting room facing the black-framed wall case with the photographs of members of the force killed on active service. At last, Maigret's head had emerged from the stairwell. She had sprung to her feet. He would grant her an interview. She would be able to unburden herself. But more than an hour had passed, and she was still waiting. The corridors were coming to life. Inspectors hurried to and fro. Doors opened and shut. People were admitted to the waiting room and then called out one after another by the guard. She, and only she, was left waiting. What was it that had prompted her to leave? Mechanically, Maigret filled his pipe. He could hear voices out on the landing, the neighbors airing their views and the police officer quietly advising them to return to their own apartments. What had become of Cecile? During the whole of the hour that he spent alone in the apartment, this was the question that obsessed him and gave him that absent, sluggish look so familiar to his colleagues. All the same, in his own fashion, he was working. Already, he was steeped in the atmosphere of the apartment. As soon as he had set foot in the entrance hall, or rather the long, dark hallway that served as such, he had observed that everything around him was old and shoddy. There was enough furniture in this small apartment to furnish twice the number of rooms. Nothing but old furniture of no particular style or date, and not a single piece of any value. It reminded him of a provincial auction of household effects, following the death or bankruptcy of the owner, a respectable middle-class citizen, whose austere mode of life had been a well-kept secret until then. In contrast, however, there was not a pin out of place, and everything was scrupulously clean. Every service, however small, was highly polished, and every ornament, however tiny, in its appointed place. The apartment could just as appropriately have been lit by candles or gas as by electricity. So little did it reflect contemporary life, and indeed the light fixtures hanging from the ceilings were converted gas lamps. The sitting room was more like a junk shop than a room, its walls covered with family portraits, watercolors, and worthless prints in black, gilt, and fake carved wood frames. Near the window stood an enormous mahogany desk with movable panels, of the type still to be found in the offices of the managers of big country estates. Wrapping a handkerchief around his hand, Maigret opened all the drawers in turn. Some were full of oddments such as keys, bits of sealing wax, pillboxes, a lorgnette frame, diaries going back 20 years, and yellowing receipts. 4 of the drawers were empty. None had been forced. Armchairs with worn upholstery, a shelf with knickknacks, a work table, 2 Louis-sized long-case clocks. In the dining room, Maigret found another such clock. There was also one in the entrance, and, he noted with surprise, indeed almost with amusement, 2 more in the dead woman's bedroom. Obviously, she had had an obsession about clocks, and the odd thing was that they all worked. Maigret became aware of this fact at midday, when they all began striking one after the other. The dining room, too, was overfurnished, so much so that there was barely room to move. Here, as in all the other rooms, there were heavy curtains over the windows, as if the inmates had dreaded the intrusion of daylight. Why, when death had struck her down without warning in the middle of the night, had the woman been wearing one stocking? He looked round for the other, and found it on the bedside rug. Thick black woolen stockings. The legs were swollen and bluish in color, from which Maigret deduced that Cecile's aunt had suffered from dropsy. A walking stick which he had picked up off the floor seemed to indicate that she was not completely bedridden, but able to get around in the apartment. Finally, hanging above the bed, was a bell rope similar to the one on the landing. He pulled it, listened, and heard the front door click open. He went to shut it, and silently cursed the neighbors who were still out there. Why had Cécile suddenly decided to leave the Quai des Ouvers? What could possibly have persuaded her to do so, when she had such very grave news to impart to the chief superintendent? She alone knew the answer. She alone could tell, and as time went by, Maigret grew more and more uneasy. What could those 2 women possibly have found to do all day? He wondered, in spite of himself, as he looked about him, and saw furniture and more furniture laden with fragile knickknacks of spun glass and brittle china, each one uglier than the next, glass globes enclosing models of the grotto at Lourdes and the Bay of Naples, photographs hanging crooked in cheap brass frames, a paper-thin Japanese cup with a mended handle, a number of odd tulip glasses filled with artificial flowers. Once again, he went into the aunt's bedroom, where the body still lay on the mahogany bed, with one leg inexplicably clad in a stocking. At about 1 o'clock, there was a flurry of movement outside in the street, then on the stairs and on the landing. While all this was going on, the chief superintendent was slumped deep in an armchair in the sitting room, still wearing his coat and hat, in a haze of blue smoke from the pipe that he had been smoking continuously. The sound of voices made him start, like a man awakened from a dream. "Well, Chief Superintendent, what's this all about, my dear fellow?" Vito, the deputy public prosecutor, smilingly shook him by the hand. He was followed by the diminutive examining magistrate, Mabille, the police doctor, and a clerk who was already looking about for a table on which to spread his papers. "Anything of interest? Good Lord, what a miserable dump." A few seconds later, the van from the forensic laboratory drew up in front of the building, and the photographers swarmed in with the bulky equipment. Overawed, the police superintendent of the Bourg-la-Reine division picked his way among this impressive gathering of officials, hoping that, in due course, someone would notice him. "Please go back to your apartments, ladies and gentlemen," repeated the policeman at the door. "There is nothing to see here. Later, you will all be interviewed separately. Get out of the way, will you, please? Come along now, move. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The fog had transformed itself into a fine drizzle, and the street lamps had been switched on earlier than usual. Maigret, his hat pulled down over his eyes, walked rapidly through the freezingly cold entrance hall of police headquarters and hastily went up the dimly lit staircase. He gave a quick, unthinking glance at the aquarium, more than ever resembling a real aquarium with the lights switched on. There were 4 or 5 people waiting, in frozen attitudes, like waxworks in a Musée Grévin, and the chief superintendent wondered why on earth that particular shade of green, which lent a deathly pallor to the human skin, had been chosen for the wallpaper, upholstery, and table covering. "Someone was asking for you, sir, I believe," said one of the inspectors, on his way elsewhere, with a bundle of files under his arm. "The boss wants to see you," the guard now informed him, pausing in his work of sticking stamps on envelopes. Maigret, without even looking into his own office, went straight on to see the chief commissioner. Only the desk lamp was switched on. "Well, Maigret?" A silence. "A wretched business, to say the least. Any new developments at the apartment?" Maigret sensed that the chief had bad news for him. He waited, his heavy brows knitted. "I did try to reach you, but you had already left Berger. It's about that young woman, a short while ago, Victor." Victor, who was afflicted with a stammer, was one of the doormen in the Palais de Justice. He had a walrus moustache and a hoarse voice not unlike a sea lion's. Victor was accosted in the corridor by the public prosecutor, who was in a prickly mood. "Listen, my friend, would you say this corridor had been properly swept today?" Now, as everyone knew, when the public prosecutor addressed anyone as friend, Maigret's thoughts were racing ahead of the chief commissioner's words. To cut a long story short, Victor, in a panic, made a dive for the broom closet. Can you guess what he found there? "Cecile," replied the chief superintendent, evincing no surprise. His head drooped. He had had time, back there in the apartment, while what are known as the standard procedures were being carried out around him, to consider the problem of Cécile from every possible angle, but had not been able to come to a satisfactory conclusion. It always came down to the same question. What could possibly have persuaded her to leave the Quai des Sauveurs, considering the very grave news she had to impart to me? He was becoming more and more convinced that she had not gone of her own free will. Someone had sought her out there in the very nerve center of police activity, within a few feet of Maigret's own door, and persuaded her to leave with him. What inducement had he offered? Who carried sufficient weight with the young woman too? Now, in a flash, he understood. "I should have known," he groaned, striking his forehead with his clenched fist. "What do you mean?" "I should have known that she couldn't have left the building, that nothing would have persuaded her to leave the building." He was furious with himself. "She's dead, of course," he groaned, staring at the floor. "Yes, if you'd like to come with me." The chief commissioner pressed a buzzer and told the guard, "If anyone asks for me or telephones, say I'll be back very shortly." Both men were equally troubled, but the chief superintendent carried the additional burden of a bad conscience, and the day had started so well. He recalled the romantic gust of hot air, a blend of frothy coffee, croissants, and rum, the illuminous morning fog. "By the way, Janvier called a while ago, apparently your Poles." With a sweep of his hand, he seemed to consign every Pole on earth to oblivion. The chief commissioner led the way through the glass door. For the past 10 years at least there had been talk of walling it up, but nothing had been done, because everyone found it so convenient. This was the door, in fact, which provided direct access between the police judiciaire headquarters and the Palais de Justice and the archives. The building was rather like the backstage areas of a theater, full of narrow stairways and winding passages, when one was escorting a prisoner to see a judge in chambers. On the right, a staircase leading to the attics which housed police records and the forensic laboratory. A little farther on, a door with frosted glass panels, beyond which lay the hurly-burly of the Palais de Justice, lawyers scurrying to and fro, the press of spectators crowding into the various courtrooms. Beyond was another, smaller door, cut, for God knows what reason, into the supporting wall of the building itself. In front of this door, an inspector was posted. He was smoking a cigarette, which he extinguished as soon as he saw the two men. Who knew of the existence of this door? Only the personnel of the department. It opened onto a fairly deep closet, a hole about 6 feet square, in which Victor, who liked to have his equipment within easy reach, kept his brooms and buckets. The inspector made himself inconspicuous. The chief commissioner opened the closet and, as it was not fitted with a light, struck a match. "Here she is," he said. As there was not quite enough room for a body to lie full length on the floor of the closet, Cécile had fallen forward against the wall with her chin pressed down onto her chest. Maigret, suddenly feeling hot, mopped his face with his handkerchief and crammed his pipe, still smouldering, into his pocket. There was no need for words. The two of them stood looking down at her, the chief commissioner and the chief superintendent, who mechanically removed his hat. "Do you know what I think, Chief? Someone must have gone into the waiting room and told her I was ready to see her, but not in my own office. Someone whom she took to be a member of my own staff." The chief commissioner merely nodded. "Speed was of the essence. Do you see? I might be ready to see her at any moment. She knew who had murdered her aunt. All he had to do was to open this door, beyond which she could see nothing. Cécile had only to take one step into the dark. First, she was stunned by a blow with a truncheon or some other blunt instrument. The foolish green hat, lying on the floor, confirmed this hypothesis. And besides, there were traces of clotted blood clinging to the young woman's dark hair. She must have staggered, or possibly fallen, before the aunt's murderer. To avoid making any noise, strangled her. "Are you sure of that, Chief?" Maigret countered. "That's what the pathologist thinks. I wanted you to be here before he started on the autopsy. You seem surprised. Why? The aunt was strangled too, wasn't she?" "Correct. What are you getting at, Maigret?" "I just don't see how both murders could have been committed by the same man. When Cécile turned up here this morning, she knew who had killed her aunt. Do you think so? If not, she would have given the alarm earlier. According to the pathologist, her aunt was dead by 2 o'clock this morning. Either Cécile witnessed the murder, or what was to stop the murderer from killing her at the same time, there in the apartment at Bourg-la-Reine? Maybe she was hiding somewhere, as I was saying, or else she found her aunt's body when she got up about 6:30 this morning. I know she woke about then, because her alarm was set for 6:30. She said nothing to anyone. Instead, she came straight here. It does seem odd. Not if we assume that she knew the murderer. She wanted to speak to me personally. She didn't trust the local superintendent of police at Bourg-la-Reine. The fact that she was killed to prevent her from talking proves that she knew. But supposing you had seen her as soon as you arrived?" Maigret flushed, which was unusual for him. "Yes, you've got a point there. That's something I can't quite make out. Maybe the murderer was tied up elsewhere before, or else he didn't yet know." With an abrupt, dismissive gesture, he grumbled, "It doesn't make sense." "What doesn't make sense?" "What I've just been saying. If last night's murderer had shown his face in the aquarium..." "The aquarium?" "Sorry, Chief. That's the inspector's name for the waiting room. Cécile would never have gone anywhere with him, so it must have been someone else. Either someone she didn't know, or someone she knew and trusted." And Maigret, looking stubborn and determined, stood contemplating the sad little bundle lying crumpled against the wall among the brooms and buckets. "It had to be someone she didn't know," he said, with sudden decisiveness. "Why? She might have gone off with someone she knew if she'd met him in the street, but not here. I confess, I was half expecting to hear that she'd been found in the Seine or some patch of waste ground. But..." Bending to avoid hitting his head on the low cross piece of the doorway, he stepped into the cupboard and struck one match and then another, and gave the body a slight push. "What are you looking for, Maigret?" "Her bag." The bag was as much a part of her as the indescribable green hat. It was a capacious bag, like a small trunk, and as she sat waiting in the aquarium, Cécile always kept it carefully cradled on her lap. It's disappeared. What do you conclude from that? Whereupon Maigret, forgetting the disparity of rank, gave way to a burst of irritability. Conclude. Are you able to draw any conclusion? The fair-haired inspector, who was well within earshot, averted his head. Noticing this, Maigret pulled himself up short. I'm sorry, Chief, but you must admit that this place is about as secure as a barn. To think that someone should have been able to go into the waiting room and... He was at the end of his tether. Savagely, he bit the stem of his pipe, not to mention that accursed door, which should have been boarded up years ago. If you had interviewed the young woman when... Poor Maigret, he was a pathetic sight, tall and heavily built, looking as solid as a rock, with his head bowed, staring at that limp bundle of clothes at his feet, that lifeless lump, and once again mopping his face with his handkerchief. What are we going to do? Asked the Chief Commissioner, wanting to change the subject. Acknowledge publicly that a murder had been committed within the very precincts of police headquarters, or, to be more precise, in this breach in the party wall between police headquarters and the Palais de Justice. There's just one favor I'd like to ask you. Would you mind if I put Lucas in charge of that business of the polls? Maybe it was just that Maigret was hungry. He had had nothing to eat since breakfast. On the other hand, he had had 3 little sips of brandy, which had sharpened his appetite. If that's what you want. Shut this door, dear fellow, and stay on guard. I'll be back shortly. Maigret returned to his office and, still wearing his hat and coat, telephoned Madame Maigret. No, I've no idea when I'll be home. It would take too long to explain. Of course not. I shan't be leaving Paris. He considered ordering sandwiches, as he so often did, from the Brasserie Dauphine, but he felt he needed air. It was still drizzling outside. He decided to go to the little bar opposite the statue of Henri IV, in the middle of the Pont Neuf. He ordered a ham sandwich. How are things, Chief Superintendent? The waiter knew Maigret. He recognized the significance of those drooping eyelids and that set face. Having trouble? A game of Beurlotte was in progress at a table near the bar. Other customers were playing the pinball machines. Maigret bit into his sandwich and thought, Cécile is dead. In spite of his heavy overcoat, it sent a shiver down his spine.
Cubbyhole. Cubbyhole. Now, a small enclosed space or room. Lorgnette. Lorgnette. Now, a pair of glasses or opera glasses held in front of a person's eyes by a long handle at one side. Effins. Effins. Verb. Reveal the presence of a quality or something. Indicate. Inconspicuous. Inconspicuous. Adjective. Not clearly visible or attracting attention. Pathologist. Pathologist. Now, a scientist who studies the causes and effects of diseases, especially one who examines laboratory samples of body tissue for diagnostic or forensic purposes.